No rancher dared to claim the monstrous black horse scarred, furious, untamable. It stood in its iron cage like a storm trapped in flesh, a beast everyone feared would kill the first hand bold enough to touch it. But when a broken war veteran stepped forward and laid down not cash, but his wedding ring, the last relic of the life he had lost, the crowd thought he had gone mad. What followed would defy law, logic, and even nature itself. The noon sun baked the dust of Hartwell's livestock yards to a hard white crust. The market was in full roar, a tide of ranchers and traders elbow to elbow, their voices a tangled roar that rattled the dry air. At the center of it all stood the auction block, where Jack Morrison worked his gavel, his voice a rhythmic chant over the bellow of cattle. Ethan Cole sat at the far edge of the crowd, half in the shadow of the wooden stands, his hat pulled low. He was a ghost among them, a man with empty pockets and a history he couldn't shake. He hadn't come to buy. He'd only hoped to pick up a scrap of day work, mend a fence, haul some hay. He was watching a life he no longer had a part in. Then the rhythm of the auction broke with a groan of metal. A battered stock trailer rumbled into the yard, engine clattering. At the wheel sat Ray Hutchkins, a man known more for his sly grin than his honesty. "Clear the way, boys," he called out. "Got something you don't see every day." The crowd shuffled, curiosity sparking. The trailer shuddered once, twice, as if something inside fought the steel walls. With a clang, Hutchkins dropped the ramp. The cage inside lurched forward, an old iron contraption scarred by rust. The sound that came from within it wasn't the bawl of cattle. It was a low, resonant rumble that made the boards tremble underfoot. The shape inside was massive, black as coal dust. "Gentlemen, feast your eyes," Hutchkins grinned. "A true mountain stallion. Caught him myself up on the high ridges." As the animal stepped into the light, the crowd went silent. He was a giant of a horse, his shoulders broad, his coat an oily black that seemed to drink the sunlight. Across his flanks ran a map of scars, old lash marks, rope burns, wounds half healed. But it was his eyes that froze the air. They burned a deep amber gold, not dull like a beast's, but sharp, calculating, alive. They swept the crowd, and wherever that gaze landed, men found themselves taking a step back. The stallion threw up his head and screamed. It was no ordinary whinny, but a thunderous cry that cracked through the yard, high and furious, shaking dust loose from the rafters. "God almighty," someone muttered. "That ain't a horse. That's the devil himself." Another whispered, "They call him Storm. Look at the way he shakes the ground." Storm reared, hooves pawing at the sky, striking sparks from the iron bars as he came down. One by one, the cowboys who had crowded close took a long, slow step back. Even Jack Morrison, the auctioneer, hesitated. This thing was different. "All right, folks," he called, forcing cheer into his voice. "Starting bid on this fine specimen, $200. Silence answered. Morrison frowned. "Come now, 200 to start." The crowd was mute. The silence thickened until all that remained was the steady rasp of the stallion's breathing. From his seat at the edge of the crowd, Ethan Cole rose. The scrape of his boots on the packed earth drew every eye. He walked toward the block, each step crunching in the hush. The stallion's eyes found him, and for the first time that day the great black beast stilled, their gazes locked, man and horse, soldier and survivor. In Storm's eyes, Ethan saw not just fury, but a weary defiance, the look of something that had lost too much to surrender now. It was the same look Ethan saw in his own mirror each morning, broken, but not beaten. Ethan reached the auctioneer's table. From his pocket he pulled a crumpled bill, the last $20 he owned, and laid it on the wood. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Then he did something that stole the breath from the air. His hand rose to the chain around his neck. With a tug he drew it free. A simple gold ring slid into his palm, catching the light in a brief dazzling flare. He set it down beside the bill. "And this," he said quietly, his voice carried in the silence, steady and unflinching. Gasps spread like wildfire. "That's his wedding ring," someone whispered. "He's lost his mind." Laughter mixed with pity, disbelief with scorn. But one man, Samuel Price, A rancher as old as the valley didn't laugh. He saw the desperation, yes, but also a fierce, stubborn resolve. He bowed his head slightly as if acknowledging the courage it took for a man to stake his last relic of love on a creature the world had condemned. In the pen, the great black stallion lowered his head, his amber eyes fixed on Ethan Cole. The drive away from Hartwell was a slow, grinding hell. Ethan's old Ford rattled down the rutted road, the trailer groaning under the weight of the cage. Inside, the black stallion slammed against the bars, shrieking with a fury that shook the entire truck. Other drivers veered wide, staring with wide eyes, unwilling to linger near the moving prison. Ethan kept his knuckles white on the wheel, glancing every few minutes at the rearview mirror. Each time those burning amber eyes met his, they were an accusation, a challenge, a reflection. "Well, boy," he rasped into the empty cab, "looks like it's just you and me now. Two souls without a home." He turned off the main road at dusk, following a half-forgotten track into the foothills, to a clearing beside a stream shaded by cottonwoods. He parked the Ford, killed the engine, and for a long moment just sat in the sudden quiet. He lowered the ramp and set the cage on the earth. The stallion shook the bars, hooves clanging like hammers. Ethan ignored it. He spread his old canvas tarp, set out his dented coffee pot, his frying pan, his tin of beans. A pitiful household next to the great beast looming in its iron cell. The first nights were chaos. Every time Ethan drew near, the stallion reared, breath rolling out like smoke. The valley echoed with his screams, shrieks so piercing that coyotes slunk away without daring to answer. Sleep became a stranger to Ethan. His eyes sank into hollow sockets. But he never left. He planted a folding chair a few yards from the cage and sat there, watching through the dark until dawn. Storm, he'd accepted the name the crowd had given him, tested him with every trick of rage. He hurled his body against the bars, pounded his hooves like drums. But Ethan did not move. He just sat, breathing slow. After one violent outburst, Ethan finally spoke, his voice even. "I know the feeling, boy. Being locked in a cage you never asked for. I've been there too." The stallion stilled. He blew out a long breath, ears twitching. The madness in his eyes dulled into a watchful suspicion. The routine changed. Ethan still built his fire, boiled his coffee, but now he talked. Not to himself, but to the black figure behind the bars. "Her name was Anna," he began one night, staring at the flames. "Silver hair before her time. She worked the diner in town, hands cracked from the hot plates, but she smiled through every shift. You'd have liked her. She never gave up on anything breathing." The horse stood silent, listening. "When the drought hit, I thought I could fight it. Sold the herd piece by piece. She took extra shifts, worked herself ragged, never once complained. And then winter came, and her heart gave out, just like that." His throat tightened. From the cage came a soft sound, a low rumble, not of anger, but of breath released. It was more than any man had offered Ethan in months. The first fragile moment arrived with water. At dawn, Ethan carried a bucket to the cage. He set it down and backed away. Storm's ears pinned flat, but thirst is older than fear. Slowly his neck lowered, and he drank. The sound of his gulps filled the morning air. For the first time, he allowed a man to stand close without violence. The next day, Ethan tried more. From his pocket, he produced a wedge of apple. He held it out, palm open, arms steady, though his heart hammered. Storm snorted, hot breath rushing over Ethan's fingers. A long pause stretched. Then the massive head dipped, teeth brushing skin as gently as if testing glass. The apple vanished. Ethan's chest tightened until he nearly wept. That night, he worked by firelight. From his pack, he drew a strip of leather and a worn knife. His hands moved with remembered skill, cutting, braiding, until a simple collar took shape. With patience, he carved the letters, STORM. He approached the cage, hands raised. "Not a shackle, not a chain," he said low. "Just a name, so the world knows you're more than a monster." He slid the gate open a fraction. The horse snorted but didn't retreat. With careful slowness, Ethan looped the leather around the thick neck. The buckle clicked shut. Storm huffed, tossing his head, not in rage but with a softer, questioning sound. Ethan stepped back. There, he said. Not my prisoner, my partner. The stallion stood tall, eyes glowing in the dark, and for the first time since the grave closed over his wife, Ethan felt the stir of something other than despair. The day Jack Morrison arrived, the heat pressed heavy on the valley. Ethan was brewing coffee when a shiny new pickup crunched to a stop at the edge of the clearing. Jack stepped out, his eyes sharp under the brim of a sweat-stained hat. Well, I'll be damned, he said, his voice carrying. Ethan Cole, heard about your little stunt in town, trading your wife's ring for the devil himself. Folks are still talking. Storm struck the bars with a hoof that rang like thunder. Ethan just sipped his coffee. Storm's what they call him. Seems fitting. Jack squared his shoulders. I'll cut straight. Lost my foreman. It's dry. The cattle are restless, and I can't keep up. I need someone who knows which end of a cow to point at water. The offer was plain. Steady pay, a roof, a purpose. But Ethan's eyes drifted back to the cage. I'll come, he said at last, but the horse comes too. No negotiation. Jack's mouth tightened. He glanced at the beast, then back at Ethan. He saw something there, a flicker of an old fire. Fine, he nodded, but if he kills anyone, it's on your head. That's fair, Ethan said. The next morning, Ethan's battered truck trailed Jack's gleaming one down the long dirt road to the Morrison spread. As they neared the gates, Storm screamed. The shriek cut the air, sending nearby cattle scattering in panic. Ranch hands poured from the barns, squinting. Ethan swung down from his cab as the cage door clanged open. Storm leaped to the ground, towering over them, his mane tangled like smoke. The hands stepped back. What in hell did you drag in here? One muttered. A stocky, thick-bearded man named Carlos Reyes strode forward. He planted himself before Ethan, eyes narrowing. Heard the tale. You traded a gold ring for that monster. Tell me it ain't true. It's true, Ethan answered, calm as stone. A ripple of laughter spread through the men. Carlos sneered, turning to Jack. If that thing's turned loose, I won't be responsible for the bodies. Ethan lifted his chin. You don't have to be. I will. The test came that very afternoon. A herd of cattle needed to be moved across half a mile of dry pasture. Normally, it was a job for 4 cowboys and a lot of cracked whips. Jack eyed Ethan, then Storm. Let's see what you two can do. Carlos scowled. You can't be serious. The hands saddled up, ready for chaos. Ethan led Storm into the field. The stallion arched his neck and bellowed a challenge that rattled the herd. The cattle balked, eyes wide. Disaster loomed. But Ethan laid a steady hand on Storm's neck. Easy, boy. Just walk with me. What happened next silenced the valley. Storm began to pace alongside the herd, not driving them, but moving in parallel. Each strike of his hooves fell heavy and measured, like a drumbeat. Boom, boom, boom. The rhythm spread. Nervous energy melted into synchrony. The cattle stopped scattering and began to flow, a single body following the cadence of the black stallion's stride. No whips cracked, no curses flew. Just the pounding of hooves in unison, a strange harmony. The herd crossed the open ground like water, finding its course. On the ridge, Jack removed his hat, rubbing his brow. Carlos stared, slack-jawed, his rope forgotten in his hand. In less than half an hour, the cattle were settled, calm, as if they'd been coaxed by 100 riders. The silence afterward was louder than any stampede. Carlos dismounted, his boots heavy. He looked at Storm, then at Ethan. Maybe, he said, his voice grudging. That's not just a horse. Jack clapped Ethan on the shoulder. You just saved me a full day's wages. Ethan's answer was simple. He looked at Storm, who stood tall, eyes calm. It wasn't me, he said softly. It was him. That night, Ethan was shown to a small cabin on the ranch's edge. Outside the door, Storm lingered, a dark shape framed by starlight. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the weight of solitude ease. The first signs were so subtle, most men dismissed them. But Ethan watched, and he kept a tally. A few days after Storm set hoof on Morrison land, things began to change. The ranch was still locked in drought, the ground cracked, the air dry. But among the dust, whispers of something uncanny began to stir. The cattle were the first to show it. Normally they spooked at anything. But when the black stallions stood near, their agitation melted away. Calves stood calm, chewing cud, soothed by his presence. One evening, Carlos Reyes was on night guard. A pair of wolves slunk from the mesquite, yellow eyes glinting. He reached for his rifle. Before he could raise it, Storm lifted his head and screamed into the night. The cry rolled like thunder. The wolves froze, then turned tail and fled. Carlos lowered his rifle, sweat on his forehead. He drove them off, he whispered to himself, like he owned the ground. The next sign came from water. At the far edge of the ranch was an old creek bed, a dry scar for years. Ethan rode out one morning with Storm. As they crossed the dry cut, the sun caught something. He knelt. There, glimmering, a thread of water trickled between the rocks. By afternoon, it was more than a trickle. It flowed with a new clarity, carrying the scent of deep springs. It was the first clean water he'd tasted in years. Jack Morrison rode out, squinting at the stream. Could be the aquifer shifted, he said cautiously. Ethan shook his head, looking at the stallion on the bank. No, Jack, it didn't just happen. It started with him. Then came the grass. There was a field on the north side of the ranch that was dead ground, sunburnt clay where only thistles grew. One morning, Carlos noticed a patch of green. He thought it was a trick of light, but he found blades of young grass sprouting through the dust. By week's end, the patch had spread into a wide carpet. I've sown this dirt a dozen times, he muttered. Nothing ever took. And now? Ethan stood nearby, silent. Storm grazed a short distance away, his black muzzle buried in the new green. The ranch hands talked. Rumors spread. Horse brings luck, one man said. Or trouble we haven't seen yet, another scoffed. But no one could deny it. The herd was calmer, healthier. Predators gave the fields a wide berth. The stream flowed stronger each day. Ethan couldn't leave it to rumor. He dug an old notebook from his pack. Each evening in his small cabin, he mapped what he had seen. A dot for the creek's rebirth, a circle for the field's new growth. A pattern began to form. Every strange occurrence lay along the paths he had walked with Storm. Each stroll, each watering, each trek across the pasture seemed to leave a trail of renewal. He pressed his pencil hard, scrawling the thought that rose unbidden. It isn't random. He leaves life in his wake. The words frightened him as much as they comforted. One evening near sunset, Ethan sat by the new creek. Storm drank nearby. The land's coming back around you, Ethan spoke softly. I see it, even if no one else wants to believe. The stallion lifted his head. His amber eyes caught the last rays of sun, turning them to fire. For a heartbeat, Ethan felt as though the animal understood. He reached out, his fingers brushing the leather collar he had carved. The syllable was steady in his mouth, a vow spoken to the earth itself. Storm snorted gently, tossing his mane. The sound was softer than before, less a warning than an answer. As weeks passed, the talk grew. Jack Morrison tried to hold the middle ground. Maybe it's a shift in weather, he told Ethan, but his voice lacked conviction. He'd never seen grass sprout from scorched earth without a single drop of rain. Carlos said nothing. His silence was louder than belief. Late one night, Ethan sat at his table, tracing the marks in his notebook. They radiated outward like ripples from a single center. The land is coming alive around him. He set the pencil down. Outside, Storm lay in the dust, his deep breaths seeming to settle the ground itself. Ethan closed the book. In the darkness, he whispered, "This is only the beginning." The ranch yard was quiet that afternoon, the kind of quiet that comes after chores. Ethan sat on an overturned bucket, oiling his boots. Storm stood tethered nearby, his massive frame casting a long shadow. The stallion's ears twitched long before the engines were heard. A line of glossy black SUVs rolled into the yard, tires crunching over gravel. They looked out of place, city steel gleaming against weathered barns. Doors opened. A woman in a tailored gray suit stepped out, her heels clicking on the dirt. She carried herself like someone who had never known thirst. Victoria Sterling. Two men in crisp ties followed, clutching leather briefcases. Their eyes darted not at the cattle, but at the stallion. Storm snorted and pawed the ground. The men took a step back. The peace of the ranch yard shattered. Jack Morrison appeared from the machine shed, wiping grease from his hands. His face carried the hard edge of a man who already disliked what he saw. Sterling advanced, her smile precise. Mr. Morrison, Victoria Sterling, representing Apex Development, we have a very generous proposal for you. Jack didn't take her hand. You picked a strange time to drive all this way. Sterling's eyes flicked toward Storm. For a heartbeat, her expression cracked. Surprise, perhaps unease. But then her smile returned, never slipping. Apex Development intends to transform this valley into a premier destination. Resorts, golf courses, luxury villas. Her words flowed like a polished script. And we want you to be a part of it. Jack's brows lowered. This is cattle land, not a playground for rich tourists. Sterling smiled wider. She motioned to her aides. They spread glossy renderings of hotels across a rough wooden table. This, Sterling said, tapping the papers, is an offer. 3 times the market value of your ranch. Cash. You walk away free, wealthy, never worrying about drought again. The ranch hands murmured among themselves. Triple the value. The number hung heavy in the air. But Ethan, watching from the side, saw Jack's eyes narrow. Jack drew himself taller. This land belonged to my father, and his father before him. I won't sell it for your golf courses. Sterling's smile sharpened. Everyone has a price, Mr. Morrison. Especially, she leaned closer, her voice dropping. When I know about your unpaid tractor loan and your property tax deadline next month. Jack froze. Those details were locked in bank files. Ethan saw what others missed. Sterling's smile wasn't hunger for progress. It was a predator's grin. She hadn't come for cattle land. She wanted what pulsed beneath it. His gaze slid to the notebook in his pocket, the map he had drawn of the reborn creek, the regreening fields, the strange circle of renewal spreading outward from Storm's steps. She doesn't want hotels, he murmured, pressing his palm against Storm's collar. She wants what lies under the ground. Storm snorted hard, stamping the dirt as though in agreement. The SUVs rolled out before dusk, leaving a haze of dust. Jack stood in the yard, his shoulders heavy. She knew too much, he said as Ethan walked up. She looked at this land like a man looks at a vein of gold. They're after the water, Ethan. I could see it in her eyes. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then it's bigger than your ranch. If they take the water, they take the whole valley. That night, Ethan spread his map on the table. The lamp flickered over his pencil marks. The creek, the grass, the calm cattle, all clustered along Storm's paths, all within the circle that Apex had suddenly declared theirs. He stared until the lines blurred, then scrawled along the edge. Not coincidence. They know. Outside, Storm lay near the door, his ears trained on the road. The Morrison ranch slept uneasy, and Ethan knew the real fight had only just begun. Saturday morning, Ethan asked Jack for a day off. He climbed into his old Ford and drove roads he could have followed blindfolded. He hadn't set foot on his own ranch since the bank padlocked the gates, but memory tugged him back. He pulled into the familiar drive. The house leaned tiredly, weeds claiming the path Anna had kept swept clean. He turned the old brass key in the warped lock. The door groaned open. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and rot, and underneath it all, the faint, aching scent of Anna's lavender soap. He moved through the rooms, gathering a few things. A cracked wedding photograph, the quilt she had stitched by hand. But he felt there was something else, some piece she had left for him. He found it in her old workroom. He pulled open a desk drawer. It was empty. Then by habit, he pressed the bottom panel. It shifted with a click. Hidden in a false drawer was a leather-bound book. The cover bore her name, Anna Cole, Private Journal. His heart stumbled. He opened it. This was no ordinary diary. Neat lines of her handwriting filled the pages with notes about Crow traditions, about their stories. Whole passages described something called the Great Horse Guardian. According to Anna, the guardian was a spirit horse, a being that appeared only when the balance of the land was broken. It carried the power of renewal. But it never worked alone. It always needed a human partner, someone chosen, someone tested by pain and loss. One entry stood out, her hand steadier than ever. Joseph Tallfeather says the guardian never comes by chance. The earth itself chooses a companion for it. I wonder if Ethan would ever understand. His hands shook. Anna had known. She had seen further than he ever had. The crunch of tires outside jolted him. A weathered pickup pulled into the yard. An old man stepped out, his silver hair in a long braid, his eyes deep as canyon shadows. Joseph Tallfeather, an elder of the Crow. He walked up the weed-choked path, his gaze fixed on Ethan. Storm, who was tied to the truck, should have reared at the stranger. Instead, the stallion lowered his head slightly as though in recognition. "I knew I would find you here," Joseph said. They sat on the sagging porch. "Anna once told me this place would call you back when you needed it most," he said. His eyes flicked to the journal on Ethan's knee. "She knew you would never take her word for it. She wanted proof, something you could hold." "I'm no chosen anything," Ethan's voice came rough. "I'm just a failed rancher." "She saw the signs," Joseph said. "Streams running again, predators fleeing, cattle at peace. You've seen them too. Storm is no accident. He was sent." Joseph's voice carried the weight of generations. "The Crow tell of the great horse guardian. When the land is wounded, the guardian returns. It bonds to one who knows loss, who has the patience to endure." "You mean me?" Ethan swallowed hard. "Storm has chosen you," Joseph nodded. "Anna saw it before you did." Ethan's hands clenched the journal. The map he had drawn, the way the predators had turned, the way the cattle had calmed, it all fit together now. "I thought I was losing my mind," he admitted. "You are not mad," Joseph said, laying a steady hand on his shoulder. "You are chosen." Storm stepped forward, closing the distance. He lowered his massive head until his breath warmed Ethan's neck. It was acknowledgement. Ethan met the stallion's gaze, no longer denying. "Then I have to accept it. You're not just a horse. You never were." The stallion answered with a soft, resonant whinny. The sun slid toward the horizon. "There will be trials yet," Joseph said, his eyes narrowing. "What stands behind Sterling is stronger, hungrier, more ruthless." Ethan looked at the journal, at the words his wife had left like a torch. His jaw set. "If the land needs me, I won't turn away." Storm threw up his head and screamed, the sound splitting the valley. It was no mere call, but a vow, an echo of Ethan's words, binding horse and man in one promise. The streets of the little town lay quiet under the glow of old sodium lamps. Ethan was heading back to his truck when a voice broke through the shadows. "Mr. Cole." A woman emerged from an alley, her shoulders hunched. It was Mariah Santos. He remembered her from the diner years ago. Now she cleaned offices in town, at Apex's regional headquarters. She clutched a thick yellow envelope, her eyes darting nervously. "I can't keep this," she whispered. "If they find out, I'm finished. Anna was kind to me once. This is the only way I can repay her." She thrust the envelope into his hands. "They think I don't understand English. But my daughter, she read it to me. This is proof. Proof of what they've done." Before he could reply, she vanished into the shadows. Back in his cabin, Ethan lit the oil lamp. He slid the envelope open with his pocket knife. A stack of papers spilled out, bearing the corporate crest of Apex Development. Confidential report, Morrison Valley Strategic Acquisition. He flipped through geological surveys, legal briefs. His eyes caught on bold print. Aquifer System, Morrison Valley Subterranean Reserve. Estimated capacity, millions of gallons. His stomach turned. Beneath the promises of resorts and golf courses lay the real prize, a hidden ocean of fresh water. Then he came to a page that froze his blood. Appendix C, Resource Management. He read aloud, his voice hoarse. Controlled upstream diversion implemented year 5 to 10. Gradual reduction in water flow to induce agricultural distress. His throat tightened. He read it again. Controlled diversion, induced distress. The drought had not been natural. Apex, working with contractors upriver, had tampered with the flow, choking streams, starving wells. They had manufactured desperation, driving ranchers to their knees. His own ranch, his own wife. The paper slid from his fingers as he sank to the floorboards. In his mind he saw Anna again, stooped over diner tables, coughing into her apron, whispering reassurances as her body failed under the strain. She didn't die of bad luck, he muttered, his voice cracking. They killed her. Not with bullets. With thirst. His fists clenched. All the years of sweat, the cattle lost, the land withered. It had all been orchestrated by men in suits. God help me, he rasped. They murdered her with ledgers and valves. Outside, the stallion stamped the earth. Ethan stumbled out, papers in his grip. Storm stood waiting, amber eyes burning. They did it, boy, Ethan whispered. They drained her life. Not heaven, not fate. Them. Storm answered with a shriek that split the night, so loud it rolled off the valley walls like thunder. For the first time since Anna's burial, his grief did not hollow him. It hardened him. Rage filled the cracks, a steady fire that forged steel. This isn't just about a ranch, he said, laying a trembling hand on Storm's neck. This is for every farmer they ruined, for Anna, for the valley itself. Storm pressed close, the heat of him like a forge. Ethan felt strength bleed into him, as if the beast shared his fury. At dawn, he marched into the Morrison kitchen. Without a word, he slammed the envelope on the table. Jack read, his eyes widening. When he reached the appendix, his fist struck the table so hard that coffee sloshed over. Good Lord Almighty, Jack swore. They've been bleeding us dry all these years. Now you know why Sterling wanted this valley so bad. Ethan's voice was steady. Not for golf, for the water. Jack nodded grimly. They'll come for us, Ethan. Hard. Ethan leaned forward, his face carved in shadow. Then we'll be ready. We don't run anymore. The first omen came at night. Ethan was dozing when a sound tore him awake. A long, piercing cry, like a trumpet echoing through the hills. He stumbled outside. Storm stood in the corral, his head thrown high. The cry rolled across the valley, not frantic, but commanding. He struck the ground with one heavy hoof. The earth shivered under Ethan's feet. Joseph Tall Feather was there, leaning on the fence. He is sending the call, the elder whispered. The guardian summons. From that night on, Storm's cries carried into every hollow and ridge. Within days, strange things began to happen. Wild horses, long vanished, appeared at the fence lines. They gathered in loose herds, watching. Then came the mule deer, filtering down from the woods. Elk followed, their antlers towering like trees. Then bison from the high mesas, shaggy and ancient. Coyotes and foxes slinked near the water, not hunting but lingering. Above, birds wheeled in great circles, so dense they clouded the sun. The most unsettling sight was their unity. Predator and prey stood side by side. Wolves brushed past deer without snapping. Hawks perched above rabbits without striking. The valley had suspended its oldest law. At first, the ranch hands panicked. But as days passed, fear gave way to awe. The animals did not come to destroy. They came to listen. Word spread. In town, people whispered of the black horse they once called a monster. He's become the leader of everything that breathes. On the fourth morning, the black SUVs returned. They roared up the ranch road, spitting dust. Victoria Sterling stepped out, flanked by uniformed guards and surveyors. By emergency order, her voice rang out, Apex Development commences survey operations at Mother Spring today. Ranchers spilled from barns. Neighbors arrived on horseback. Joseph came from the ridge, his face carved from stone. Ethan stood with Storm at his side, Anna's journal in his hand. They marched toward Mother Spring, the sacred pool ringed by stones. Sterling strode to the center, lifting a sheath of documents, a government seal blazing crimson on the cover. This, she declared, is lawful authority. No one has the right to interfere. Ethan stepped forward, his voice booming. Don't listen. These papers aren't salvation. They're chains. They've been choking this valley for years. Sterling's laugh was sharp, cutting. And who are you, Mr. Cole? A failed rancher who traded his wife's ring for a beast? You expect them to take your word over the law of the United States? She raised the papers higher. Storm moved. He stepped forward, hooves pounding the rock, eyes blazing like molten gold. The crowd parted. The stallion halted before Sterling. Then he struck. One hoof slammed down upon the stone. The sound cracked like thunder. A tremor rippled outward. Sterling staggered. The parchment in her hands shook. Sparks glowed, then flared. Flames raced across the pages, devouring seal and signature alike. "No!" Sterling shrieked, flinging the burning sheath to the ground. The papers disintegrated, rising as black ash into the sky. The crowd gasped as one. Joseph lifted his hand, his voice carrying with unshakable certainty. "The Guardian has spoken. No law written by man stands above the law of the earth." The ranchers wavered no longer. Conviction surged. "I've seen it with my own eyes," Carlos Reyes said, his voice steady. "That horse is no demon. He is the Guardian." Around the spring, the circle of animals held their posts. Bison, elk, horses, deer, a living barricade. Sterling stumbled backward, her poise shattered. "This is nothing but trickery," she screamed. "I will return, and if I must bring soldiers, I will." But her words sounded thin. The battle had shifted. It was now a struggle of faith, of heart, of a people standing with the land itself. By evening, the valley glowed. Ethan stepped into the circle, Anna's journal raised high. Around him stood ranchers, children, elders. Beyond them stood the silent ranks of animals. "We do not stand alone," Ethan cried. "We fight for all of them." Storm lifted his head and screamed, a sound so vast it seemed to tear the heavens open. The valley became a single living choir. From that moment, none doubted. They had crossed into a war for the very soul of the valley. In the fading light, with Storm at his side and Anna's words in his hand, Ethan Cole felt destiny settle upon him like armor. They set out before noon, a long procession marching toward Mother Spring. Storm walked at the front, hooves drumming a patient cadence. Jack Morrison rode beside Ethan, jaw tight. Joseph Tallfeather came on foot. Behind them, families, and then the animals. A tide of wild horses, bison shuffling like moving boulders, elk with antlers wide as doorways. Ranch cattle drifted in from the fields, summoned by a call only they could hear. They crested the last rise and saw the spring, a coin of light on the valley floor. Then engines broke the quiet. Black SUVs swarmed the road, followed by trucks with government plates and men in Kevlar vests. Victoria Sterling stepped out, a portable PA crackling to life. "By emergency national water order," her voice boomed, "I am authorized to seize and secure Mother Spring for public necessity. Any interference will result in arrest." The words national and federal made even brave men feel small. But Ethan set his feet against it. "This isn't about the nation," he called out. "This is about a ledger and a stock price." Sterling flicked her fingers. Men in vests started forward. Storm screamed. It wasn't fury, it was command. The sound ran along the bones of the valley. A living wall formed. The wild horses stepped first, fanning shoulder to shoulder. Bison swayed into a second line. Elk moved to the flanks, their antlers a tangled palisade. The guards faltered. Whatever they were trained for, it wasn't this. Joseph lifted his staff. "Look," he said evenly, "when the Guardian speaks, the earth remembers how to stand." "You don't understand," Sterling said into the mic, her tone turning paternal. "This water supports cities, industry, hospitals. I have an emergency order." She lifted a fresh stack of embossed pages. "For years," Ethan shouted back, "you siphoned us dry to grease your plan, and now you call your own shortage an emergency. That's not an order. That's the punchline." Storm rose. He lifted through his shoulders until he seemed taller than the cottonwoods. His call this time came from someplace deeper, from the ground itself. The stones around Mother Spring trembled. In the center, the water bulged and rolled. A dark braid of birds peeled from the wider circle, winding into a spiral that reached for the sun. The light dimmed. "Tricks!" Sterling shouted, but her voice was too high. "No human hand can hold this many threads," Joseph answered. "You wanted to meet the power you claimed. This is it, and it isn't yours." Something yielded in the crowd. Men dropped to their knees, palms pressed to soil that thrummed like a sleeping heart. Local reporters, called by the ranchers, stood on hay bales, phones held high, live feeds rolling. Storm answered with another ringing call. From the west, a line of slate gathered into a front. Clouds stacked black on black. Lightning stitched a white seam from ridge to ridge. Then the sky opened. Rain didn't begin. It fell all at once, a sheet driven hard and clean. The world became water. Ranchers threw their heads back and laughed, some sobbing through their grins. Children shrieked and jumped in forming puddles. Ethan stood still, chin lifted, letting the cold soak him to the ribs. The taste in his mouth was metal and stone, and the memory of 100 dry mornings. "Anna," he said into the downpour, "you brought the rain." The suits broke. Sterling hunched as an aide threw a coat over her. Lawyers skidded, their binders turning to pulp. The spell of order that money cast dissolved as quickly as ink. Mother Spring answered like a throat cleared. Water heaved up through rock, a silver column that sloshed over the lip and found the old dry channels. Along the valley floor, lines that had been scars darkened and filled. From the seams in the mud, a rash of green needled up, thin blades pushing through the dirt. A bison dropped its head and tore the first mouthful like a man tasting bread after famine. "Balance return," Joseph cried, laughter in his voice. "The Guardian has given back what was taken." "What drought?" Ethan spun and pointed, not with a finger, but with the whole weight of the moment. "Look around you. The thing you used as a lever is gone." The phone cameras caught it all. The surge of water, the green pushing up through mud, the faces wet with rain and relief. "If there is no emergency," Joseph said, his voice a judgment, "your emergency powers are ash." A shout rose from the crowd. Engines complained, tires spun, and the line of vehicles jerked and slewed out of the pasture. A young reporter in a yellow slicker shouted into her mic, "Apex is retreating from Morrison Valley." Sterling collapsed into the back of an SUV, mascara bleeding down her face. A junior attorney, pale with rain and the realization that careers can end where roads do, leaned close and murmured, "Ma'am, if those upstream diversion documents surface, well, there will be federal scrutiny." He didn't say FBI. He didn't need to. She stared through the glass at a horse that did not move, and for the first time she had nothing to say. In the weeks that followed, headlines rolled like thunder. Federal agents walked into Apex offices and walked out with boxes. Executives who had been names on glossy brochures became names in court filings. The stock curled in on itself like paper over a flame. Maria Santos gave her statement, holding her daughter's hand. When she left the building, the sun on the pavement looked different. Morrison Valley became a phrase people used when they talked about resistance. Ethan was called a dozen names. The ones that stuck were the simplest. The man and the horse who saved a valley. He shrugged them off. "The land chose Storm," he said. "Storm tolerated me. I did the part a man can do." Storm, who had been a monster and a bad omen, became a quiet legend. Kids drew him on math paper. Black body, silvered mane, yellow eyes bright as coins. Ethan slept better. The ache behind his ribs didn't vanish, but it changed shape into something he could carry. On an afternoon bright enough to make shadows sharp, Ethan swung onto Storm's back and walked the rim of the valley. The ground was soft, the way dirt feels when it forgives. Green licked up every slope. They stopped by the water. Birds were loud as if they'd been saving up songs. Ethan slid down and put a hand on the stallion's neck. The air after rain tastes like a first promise. "Anna," he said, "you were right. Love didn't go anywhere. It just learned a new job." Storm lowered his head and drank. The sound of his muzzle in the water was the quietest kind of thunder. Ethan turned, taking it all in. Pasture and ridge, cattle and antler. He didn't think, "We're done." He thought, "We have begun." Behind him, the spring kept speaking, and the valley listened. And for the first time in a long time, the listening felt like enough. Spring returned to Morrison Valley with a softness that felt almost impossible. The hills wore new grass like a clean shirt. On the big highway map, a fresh green patch had been printed, Mercer Storm Wildlife Sanctuary. The sanctuary came from kitchen table meetings and a stubborn chorus of yeses. Ranchers kept their land but signed stewardship compacts. Barbed wire fences were hauled away, replaced by wildlife-friendly crossings. It wasn't a museum. It was a working truce between people and place. Ethan stood on a knoll above Mother Spring one morning, watching a group of teenagers. The new sign beside him showed a silhouette of a horse and the line, "When the guardian speaks, the land remembers how to stand." Jack Morrison limped up beside him, mug in hand. "They printed us on the map," he said. "Never thought I'd see it." "We didn't ask for it," Ethan said. "No," Jack agreed, "but we earned it." Scientists came, their clipboards filling with data that defied their models. Groundwater recharge was off the charts. Insect diversity shot up. Nesting success doubled. The journals would argue about mechanisms for years. The valley just accepted life returning. Schools brought buses on Fridays. Ethan would walk the kids along the trails, showing them coyote scat, a bison wallow, a deer path. "What happened here?" a girl asked one day, her brown eyes serious. "We were separate," Ethan said. "We forgot we're part of the same circle. When you break one link, the chain fails. When you mend a link, the chain holds." Storm refused every pen and saddle. The corral gate stayed open. Sometimes he was there at dawn, and sometimes he was gone for a week, a rumor in the timber, a shadow on a ridge. Ethan never tried to keep him. That would be like trying to keep a thunderhead. The leather collar with the stamped name hung on a nail in the shack, oiled, respected, but no longer needed. On a Saturday in late summer, Ethan drove into Hartwell. The auction yard smelled the same, but it was different from the inside of him. Near the end, a small pen rolled past. Inside, a colt stood with legs too long for its body, ribs showing like barrel slats. Its head hung low. "Too weak," someone muttered. "Won't make a winter." Ethan stood. He walked to the rail. The colt flinched, then went still. "I'll take her," he said. The price was almost nothing. He counted out the bills. He slipped the halter on gently, his voice low. "Easy there. You're going where the work is kind." As he led the colt to the truck, people murmured, "He's doing it again." Ethan didn't look for omens. He just put his hand on the skinny neck and felt the jump of a frightened heart. "You're not useless," he told the colt. "You're a beginning." At the sanctuary gate, he let the colt smell the new grass. Halfway up the slope, he stopped. On the low hill beyond Mother Spring, a black shape stood against the afternoon. Storm. The sun caught his mane, turning it to silver. The stallion did not move, did not call. He only dipped his head, the tiniest fraction, a gesture so clean it felt ceremonial. Ethan grinned and touched the colt's shoulder. "See that?" he said. "We've got approval." Night fell. The colt lay curled in the soft lot, her sides rising and falling. Ethan sat on the steps of his shack. Somewhere on the far ridge, a coyote sang. Then another voice rolled down the basin, deeper, carrying a long horizon of memory. Storm's call wasn't a challenge anymore. It was a thread thrown out and caught. It said, "I am here." It said, "So are you." It said, "Continue." Ethan put his hand to his chest and felt the circle of the necklace where Anna's ring rested. "We kept it, love," he told the dusk. "The water, the grass, the promise. The work doesn't end. That's the blessing." On the hill, Storm's shape grew less distinct, as if the night were claiming him. But the feeling of him did not fade. It went wider. It lived in the hollows of the cottonwoods, the run of the creek, the sure-footedness of a colt who will walk out of fear one morning because someone kept showing up. The sign at the road said Mercer Storm Sanctuary, and that was true. But the people who stayed a while learned another truth. The place wasn't a fence line. It was a lesson, repeated in hoofprint and raindrop. A valley had chosen to answer together, and somewhere, a horse made of thunder and shade would lift his head, gauge the wind, and move toward the place where he was needed next. In the meantime, the spring ran, and children learned the shape of tracks, and ranchers mended gates with more care than before. And Ethan sat listening. He didn't rush the silence. He trusted it. When Storm's call came again, he smiled, stood, and rose to meet the work. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us.